Good evening, everyone. I am Brisa Sotelo Vargas, and it is my pleasure to welcome you to this evening's discussion on power shift and how Latinos transformed politics in America. Tonight's event is brought to you by a partnership between USC Price School of Public Policy and the USC Latino Alumni Association, two USC organizations that are near and dear to my heart. I am a proud USC and USC Price and USC Annenberg alum, former scholar and current member of USC Latino Alumni Association, and a member of the USC Price Athenian Society Leadership Council. The Athenian Society is a premier philanthropic support organization for the Sol Price School of Public Policy Athenian Society members, which are committed to the mission of the USC Price School to improve the quality of life for people and communities here and abroad. What I love most about the Athenian Society are the impactful, thought-provoking, and engaging discussions. We have those discussions constantly, and today's most pressing issues will be talked about, including tonight's panel discussion. I leave every Athenian Society event with a strong sense of pride for what USC, Price, and Athenian Society does for our communities. Please be sure to pick up membership materials at the end of the event. I encourage you to talk to me or any of the USC Sol Price employees and staff here on how to become a member. Support from people like you help us continue to hold these critical conversations, and we hope you will join us. And now it is my pleasure to introduce Jack Knott, the Dean of the Sol Price School of Public Policy, who holds the C. Irwin and Ian L. Piper Chair. He has led the school in this role since 2005. Under Dean Knott's leadership, the Price School has experienced significant growth and has strengthened its position as a leader in public affairs, research, and education. Dean Knott has also shepherded the Price School's steady ascent in the U.S. News and Work Report rankings, moving from number 7 in 2008 to now number 3 this year among public school affairs nationwide. That deserves an applause. Dean Knott was instrumental in the launch of the Athenian Society and the Dean Speaker Series when he first arrived to USC. Through his guidance, our events have included fascinating and inclusionary discussions, including our 2018 gubernatorial debate last spring and our Fall Athenian Society Policy Breakfast, discussing the pros and cons of the impact on Prop 10 on LA's rental control policies. We are incredibly grateful for Jack's support of the Athenian Society and our programs. Please join me in welcoming Dean Knott.
Well, thank you so much, Brisa. I really appreciated that introduction and for your enthusiasm for our USC community and for USC Price as well. Thank you. On behalf of the USC Sol Price School of Public Policy and the USC Latino Alumni Association, I'm so glad you are here to join us for this, what I know will be a very dynamic discussion among some of California's most important political leaders. Before we get started, please join me in recognizing some important community leaders and alumni in our audience. And when I call your name, it would be nice if you can stand, and then we'll recognize you as a group. First is City Councilmember of the City of El Monte, Vicky Martinez. Second is USC Trustee Frank Cruz. Third, Athenian Society Council Leadership Chair, Deborah Castro. Is Deborah here? Yes, Deborah. Former State Senator Vanessa Delgado. Vanessa. And former mayor of the city of Downey, Fernando Vasquez. Is Fernando here? Okay. As Brisa mentioned, I truly believe one of our core responsibilities as a leading school of public policy is to bring together a wide perspective from faculty, students, staff, and alumni, and the community to engage in educational discourse on a broad range of very pressing issues impacting our communities here and abroad. Open, critical dialogue has always played a critical, important role in the USC Price education, and I'm proud to continue this tradition, especially as this year is our 90th anniversary as a school, having been founded back in 1929. Many of you joined us earlier this year at City Hall, where we launched our year-long celebration of our 90th anniversary, paying homage to our roots, because the very first classes that we taught were taught at City Hall, not here on the USC campus. It's given us a wonderful and unique opportunity to examine our school's mission-driven past in order to help us navigate also a very important path for the future, much like the panel will do tonight. An interesting fact about USC Price that provides a fitting backdrop for tonight's discussion is that we were first called the USC School of Citizenship and Public Administration, which reflected our founders' interest in the fact that citizens, civic education, and citizen engagement was so important to a healthy democracy. They didn't want a government that aggrandized itself, but rather one that worked to improve the quality of life for all people in all communities. And that really defines the mission of the school to this very day. This mission is also a common thread and driving force behind our panelists and our moderators' collective years in public service. USC Price's footprint started here in California, a state that plays a really important role in America's future. It is a state with an innovative spirit, a dynamic economy, care for the environment, and embrace of diversity, which are all important values and goals for the rest of the country. Holding this discussion of Latino political power in California on this day, the very day that we celebrate the life and legacy of Cesar Chavez, seems most appropriate. His organizing tactics continue to influence the labor movement and new generations of political activists. He taught us how a grassroots movement is about listening and learning from those who are deeply impacted by injustices. And he inspired us to lead with a heartfelt sense of morality. And I had my first exposure to the Latino community in Michigan with migrant laborers coming from Mexico who worked for the Heinz Corporation, and my job was to work with them in providing housing and recreation, et cetera. So I was a second-year college student and became many good friends with many people who were, picking cucumbers to become, the pickles that Heinz uses. So providing a little context for tonight's discussion, I am honored to introduce co-author of Power Shift, How Latinos in California Transformed American Politics, David Yeyon. Yeyon is also a political analyst, writer, and lecturer specializing in Latino politics, U.S.-Mexico relations, and politics in the United States and Mexico. He's a senior strategist and advisor at Latino Decisions and a senior fellow at the Center for the Study of Los Angeles at LMU. He's a graduate of Princeton, Stanford, and El Colegio de Mexico. He has also taught courses in politics, U.S. Latin American relations, and Latino studies throughout California, including right here at USC. So please join me in welcoming David A. Young.
Thank you, Dean Nutt. It's a pleasure to be here and an honor, really. I'd like to thank not just the Dean, but all of the sponsors for tonight's gathering and everybody who came, the Price School, the Athenian Society, and of course the SC Latino Alumni Association. Many thanks also to all of the participants of the key leaders that are principal figures in the book that are with us here tonight. 4 of the 10 principals are here, and of course the moderator, who I'm going to say a couple of words about. And thanks to everyone. It's great to be back here at SC. I worked here on 3 different occasions in the last millennium. I'm going to very quickly introduce both our book and your moderator for tonight, whom I've known since we were both graduate students in the last millennium. And so I'm going to talk kind of fast. Your USC Vice President for Government Relations, Martha Escutia, hardly needs introduction here, but I'll try to offer 3 takeaways from our book by way of introduction and say a bit about Martha that isn't in the bios that you have in the program today. We met in Washington, D.C. way back when. But flash forward to now, and including about the book, 3 takeaways out of dozens to choose from in our book, from our deep dive into the Latino political empowerment experience. And I'm speaking primarily, although I don't see a lot of students, but I had in mind speaking primarily to the students here with regard to these takeaways. Just 3. Learning, by which I mean intentional political learning. 2, leadership development, including the development not just of leaders as we think of them, but activists, organizers, and critically, leadership networks, action networks. And 3, resilience. Number 1 of 3 of the takeaways, intentional political learning, which those students that are here are doing right now, as is everyone else, by being here tonight. Political learning is what our book is about, or at least one of the main things the book is about, and what it's for. Many factors are involved in political empowerment, and one key one is the acquisition of professional political skills, which must be learned. Vice President Escutia has been learning and applying her learning for decades, moving deftly from one context to another, from the electoral arena to the legislative arena, to private practice, and now in the context of this premier institution, vitally important arena of leadership. Intentional political learning requires learning from others, of course, but also experimentation, innovation, and risk-taking, sometimes audacious risk-taking. Many stories of such risk-taking are in the book, and among those that are here with us from that history, some audacious stories of the risks that they took in advancing the Latino political empowerment cause. Students, if there are students, you here probably know and should know that in your college years, especially here in the heart of LA, you can learn so much, mostly without having to take risks, and even get academic credit for it. So look into the opportunities. There are many, and not any that I can mention right now. 2 of 3 takeaways: leadership and leadership network development. The leaders we focused on in Power Shift developed as activists, organizers, and political leaders in a wide variety of ways, and all developed impactful leadership networks, action networks. Vice President Escutia helped to grow the California Latino Legislative Caucus, more, in my mind, a leadership network than an organization, in the state capitol, and then became its first woman chair. The caucus was founded by Richard Alatorre in 1972 and was greatly expanded under the leadership of Richard Polanco in the 1990s. Martha has had the distinction of having led the Latino caucus in the state capitol and the Women's Caucus simultaneously. Takeaway 3 of 3, resilience. Consider that among, their faces were there before, the 10 principal figures in Power Shift in our book: Ed Roybal, Esteban Torres, Richard Alatorre, Art Torres, and Richard Polanco all lost the first time they ran for office. But then they ran again and won. Now, who is now State Senator Marielena Durazo and City Councilmember Gil Cedillo, who both developed as union organizers, both had the presidencies of their union locals snatched away. But it didn't derail them. Mayor Antonio Villaraigosa lost the first time he ran for mayor in 2001, but then ran again at the first opportunity and then won re-election. Resilience, learning, leadership, and network development. Remember these themes in the course of tonight's discussion and when you read our book. And with that, I hand this over to the very able hands of Vice President Martha Escutia. Thanks.
Thank you all so much, and I apologize ahead of time because my voice comes in and out. I'm going to ask Richard Alatorre, former California Assemblymember and former City Councilmember of LA, to please come up and take your seat, followed by Gil Cedillo, a former California Assemblymember and a former senator and a current City Councilmember of LA, followed by my wonderful Richard Polanco, former California Assemblymember and senator, and followed by, last but not least, by my dear friend Antonio Villaraigosa, former California Assemblymember, former speaker, and former mayor of LA. These are our panelists for tonight. And let me just say a few words. These men are my friends. These men are my mentors. I did not have the fortune of having a woman to mentor me. The one who mentored me from the very beginning was Richard Polanco. George Pla was my first honorary campaign chair. Richard Alatorre endorsed me without even meeting me, without even knowing me. And I served in the state legislature with several of them. On behalf of all of them, as well as myself, we thank you, Dean Knott, for your progressive leadership. We thank you, Dean Knott, and the USC Price School, my alma mater, as well as the USC Latino Alumni Association for hosting this event. Thank you for the honor of highlighting the story of Latino political empowerment in California. Now, the panelists and I have one thing in common. We all grew up in the barrios of East LA. We did. Actually, we all grew up like maybe within a mile away from each other. I was like by Our Lady of Lourdes, Gilbert was by Resurrection, Antonio was up by City Terrace. I don't know, you were somewhere by Maravilla, East LA unincorporated, you know, for both Alatorre and Polanco. So we all grew up within literally 1 or 2 miles of each other. Obviously, we grew up in different times. I'm the baby. But one thing that never changes is that we all grew up with a common belief that was passed on by our families, and that is that with hard work, anything is possible in this country. And in the barrio, you quickly learn that your word is your bond, and loyalty is everything. And since we are gathered here for a gathering of political history, you will soon see that loyalty is everything in politics, as well as in any aspect of life. Because frankly, when it all comes down to the bottom line, all we have in this world is our word and our ability to be loyal people and to always give back and not forget who brought you to the dance. That's all we have as human beings. So for the students in the audience, and I know there are several of you, some of you are about to graduate, some of you are beginning, but also even for the young professionals or maybe the mid-level managers, I will tell you that there are a lot of similarities between politics and every other job that's out there. You will learn a lot from tonight's lecture. First and foremost, what you will learn is that in politics, whether it's politics or any type of job, you always have to remember that your integrity is critical. Your integrity only belongs to you. Your job cannot take away your integrity. A political party cannot take away your integrity. Your integrity belongs to you. I know I always say that to my staff. No shortcuts are allowed in politics because everything comes to light sooner or later. Just like no shortcuts are allowed in the job market because ultimately you will be judged by your work product. Secondly, in politics as well as in the job market, loyalty is absolutely essential. There will always be opportunities for promotion, and I say take the promotion and compete fairly, but never promote yourself by stepping over a political colleague or a work colleague. And the stories of these men, you will hear stories of survival, starting way behind home plate, surviving tough episodes in the barrios, selling jewelry or selling oranges, getting kicked out of school, and succeeding despite an educational system that was stacked against them. And yet they thrived because politics, after all, is the art of the possible. The book Powership is a quintessential American story. It is a story of sacrifice. It is a story of possibility. It is a story of all of you. It's a story of them. It's a story of me. It is a story of all of us. Thank you very much. The moment of truth. I'll be nice, which is kind of bad for my reputation. But I will be nice, I'll try. And I will start first with Mr. Alatorre. When I read the book, I didn't even realize that you were professor at UC Irvine. And so I didn't even realize that at a young age, you were selling jewelry, to make ends meet. And so not only did my respect for you go up tremendously, but it just showed to me that your life's arc is very varied. You went from the east side, from Maravilla, to UC Irvine, and to the halls of Sacramento. So I'm going to talk to you about really a fundamental aspect in politics, which is the concept of reapportionment. For those of you who don't know what that is, very quickly, after every census, there's an analysis of the population, and the year after the census is taken, a reapportionment is done to do all the lines for Congress, for state legislature, and for the city and county governments. But guess who does the lines? The state legislature. And guess who did it in 1981? Assemblymember Richard Alatorre. So in 1981, the Latino caucus at that time was called the Chicano caucus, and literally there must have been about 2 or 3 people that were part of the caucus. And everybody laughs because they say that they all fit in a telephone booth. So the question that I have, Mr. Alatorre, is reapportionment is a nasty political internal exercise, and you have to satisfy a lot of competing interests, manage a lot of egos. How did you do that in 1981 when you were perhaps 1 out of 3 people? Who were your allies? What deals did you make? and how did you balance all these competing interests against the greater objective, which is to ensure political empowerment for the Latino community? Because it is true that Alatorre was the one that laid the groundwork for the Latino empowerment of Latinos in California, because he created 2 additional congressional seats. So Richard, how did you do that? And by the way, your speaker was not like, he's a friendly guy, Willie Brown, but like, it's Willie Brown, and it kind of makes you like wonder, like, whoa,
Well, no, it's not that way. I had a very common objective, and that was to guarantee that Willie would maintain his speakership for at least that 10 years that we did the redistricting on. So not only did we do that, that one was guaranteed. And I developed a saying, fair and equitable. And of course, fair and equitable was how I saw equity and how I developed the term equitable and fair. So we had competing interests, but I learned one thing, is 41 votes to pass a reapportionment plan. And we had, about 45 at the time. And, my idea was to see if we could get Republicans to vote for it. And if not, then we went ahead and took care of our interests. My interest was making sure that Willie Brown stayed as the speaker, which he did, and increased the size of the legislature over the next decade because of his brilliance and because of a reapportionment that was put together to guarantee that Democrats would get elected, not just in 1982, but would get elected for the entire decade. And we accomplished that. And I accomplished one other thing, is my objective was to increase the size of Chicanos. I was able to do that, not just over, a few years, but I think you look at the wonderful and the great work that Richard Polanco did in chairing the Latino caucus, as it was called. Didn't like the idea, but it sounded pretty good. And making sure that we maintain the leadership, and that's how we accomplished it.
Now, obviously, your efforts in 1981 laid the groundwork for Esteban Torres to run for Congress for the first time in 1982, as well as Marty Martinez. And frankly, that's where we all met. The group of us here, we were all running the campaign for Marty Martinez with George Pla, the campaign manager, and I was the opposition researcher. But more on that later. Now, Mr. Alatorre, in the 1970s, you did something very unusual, which was to join forces with an African-American man by the name of Merv Dimely. And in the 1970s, you and Merv jointly developed the Bilingual Services Act, which is a bill to provide language rights to people in all sets of government. This is in the 1970s when, frankly, kids were still being, get the ruler and they would slap your hands for speaking Spanish. And yet you did that in the 70s. What got you into doing that when you knew that, there wasn't really much support for language rights at that time?
Well, it was, the idea came just as the idea of forming the Chicano caucus at the Democratic Convention in Florida and Miami. And, we thought of the idea that why can't we set up a Latino caucus? We knew it wasn't going to be big, and I knew that most of the people didn't want the job. I wanted the job because, I just thought it was a great way of moving around the state and helping others get elected to life. I love politics, and I can't say that I was a wonk when it came to subject matter, but I was good at
Counting.
Huh? I was good at counting, even though it surprised Antonio that I could count. But we did that. But the caucus, so it was thought about then, and it was simple. You were going to get two things for one. You were going to get people that were negotiating, trying to get services from the state, couldn't communicate with the people that were giving or would make the decision about the services. And then, in order to get enough people, then we thought that they should be offered a premium for speaking another language but the language of the land. Was it popular? No. Just like it's not popular now. But is it a necessity? I think that everybody that lives in this country, lives in the state, has a right to receive the services that they justifiably need in this great state.
Thank you, Mr. Alatorre. Your effort was the first one in language rights, and I'm glad that we're talking about it because you never get enough credit for it. So I thank you for that.
Thank you.
Now, my next question is for Senator Polanco. Now, Richard, I think everybody knows that you are a peacemaker, and I am your warrior queen. And that's why you and I made the great political couple in the early 1990s. And obviously, you learned your craft of bringing people together in the Maravilla projects in the 1970s. But yet, I would respectfully suggest that your point of greatest influence came after 1992. And I am trying to figure out, obviously, in 1992, you were alone. It's like the cheese stands alone. He was the cheese in 1992, the only Latino left in the state legislature, because Alatorre had gone off to city council, Molina had gone off to the supervisors, and Lucio Rueda Allard and Javier Becerra had decided not to run for re-election in the state legislature, but rather run for Congress. So Richard was by himself. And so what I want to do is find out what was it that made you grow the Latino caucus and build it, but more importantly, and this is something that hopefully a lot of people do know, why did you really target women? How did you know that 1992 was going to be the year of the woman, which got Dianne Feinstein and Barbara Boxer elected, but also got a lot of Latinas elected, and you continued doing that in 94 and doing that in 96. I mean, what is it about us? Are we like, do we kick ass as candidates? You know? So,
Yes.
yes. So what was it that you found out that obviously a lot of people since then have forgotten? Because women have gone, we've lost seats.
Yes, we have lost, and I'm glad to see in the Senate the reemerging of Latina presence. To the question, why, how, and what was the purpose? After serving for several years, you realize that learning how to count is critical, and that 41 is a magic number in the Assembly for policy bills, and 21 on the Senate side. So I realized that that first year when I put a plan together, and it was a plan where I was committing myself to identifying women. Marta Escutia, I think we gave Marta Escutia like 48 hours to run, and she said to me, well, what happens if I lose? And I looked at her and I said, Marta, you have a law degree, you're a graduate of USC, and pardon the language, and you're afraid you can't get a freaking job? But it's the quality of the candidate that mattered. It was the ability to have women who could articulate the issues, who were disciplined enough to do what are very basic fundamentals in getting elected. And we will always say, and to this day, you do two things. You raise money and you walk. If you're not walking, you're raising money, and if you're not raising money, you're walking, because all things being equal in a campaign, I'm of the opinion that the person that reaches more people at the doorstep will ultimately have and be victorious. And so I think a lot of my comfort zone with women, I grew up in Maravilla. We were the only Hallelujah family on the block. The pastor was a woman by the name of Hermana Chavez, to this day I remember, who was very powerful. My mom, obviously an incredible impact. And I felt very comfortable if I reflect as to the why. And I was not wrong. We did not subscribe to having ethnic minorities run in only minority districts. Right. We have women who ran in Latina women who ran in 19% voter registration, 11% districts. The Nell Sotos of the world, who has a legacy in the district that she was primed for. We woke her up, Marta and I, 1 o'clock in the morning to offer and ask her to please, are you ready? And I could hear the conversation with her husband, Phil Soto, who was one of the first Latinos in the 60s to get elected. And so it's a long ways to answer why I felt it, I believed in it, I saw that we can make a big difference with the wave that was coming, with Dianne Feinstein, who I supported for governor very early on, and Barbara Boxer. There was going to be a tail, and so we were not wrong. Our candidates were articulate, they were well financed, we provided the management team. We did everything that the institution of the Assembly and the Senate do, but we did it with a focus in enhancing and changing the profile that existed in Sacramento with both Latinas and with Latinos.
Now, Senator Polanco, you took a risk Because in 1992, 94, 96, 98, 2000, 2002, and I know these dates by memory because he had me writing all the mail, and at 3 in the morning, I was editing everything. So it's like they had me spying on the candidates to make sure that they were walking precincts. And then if I saw a candidate gaining weight, that told me they were not walking precincts. We would actually measure their gut. You know, true story. We would measure their gut.
He's now a member of Congress.
He's now a member of Congress. And we said, you're not walking precincts. You gained 10 pounds. And what's this coming into work at 10 o'clock? No. So, yeah, I had to do that. I would stay out there at 7 in the morning and just wait till they showed up. Banker's hours, these candidates. But that's what it takes to run campaigns that were basically out of the mainstream of the Assembly Democratic Caucus. And that's the question I have to ask you, Richard, because that's the risk that you took. In order to empower and grow the Latino caucus, you basically went against Willie Brown and his candidates for assembly. How did you do that?
The rule was if it's a Democratic seat, majority, and there are 2 candidates, Democrats, that leadership would not play in those races. I realized that by winning the primaries in that kind of a district, you didn't have a big challenge for the November. You were coming to the dance. And so I had to figure out how what I was doing was not to be viewed in a negative light from the speaker. And so I went and I shared with the speaker that I would be involved in these primaries and that I did not want him to think that what I was doing was to build a power base that would go ultimately against him. And so I didn't really see it as a risk. I saw it more as really an obligation and a duty at that point in that moment, given what was left or what would be left if I did not engage. I had learned the rules. It's the other thing you learn. You master the rules, you can pretty much dictate the outcome. And so I didn't see it as a risk. And I'll say this, and I constantly repeat myself in this. This was not done by me alone. There are people out here who I've known for years who bought into the plan. I literally wrote down the districts, the amounts, the budgets, and detailed it out much like you would do if you're a business person, but for political reasons, with an outcome, and realized that that had to happen. And so I give credit to those who believed in the plan, those who are here today in the audience, the Davids, the Georges, the others that are here. You believed in the idea, and in so doing, you believed in me. And that gave me the comfort of if it meant being put in the closet for what was being done, so be it. And so the risk was not, for me, really a big risk.
It was an investment in the future.
Yes,
So
indeed.
very well done, Senator Polanco. Now, Mr. Villaraigosa, Mr. Mayor, wow, I read about your life's arc. You got kicked out of high school? You got kicked out of high school, huh?
I was a bad boy.
You were a bad boy? But you know, look at this. You rose to be a speaker, a council member, a mayor, a candidate for governor. And so for a lot of you out there who perhaps might not have a straight path in terms of high school, college, and whatever, you can take your little side detours, as long as you get back on it. And I remember reading that you owe a lot of it to a mentor of yours in high school. Was his last name Katz?
Yeah.
Mr. Katz, who took you under his wing and just brought you back into high school and you finished it off, and then you were also friends with the quarterback from the football team at Roosevelt High School.
My little brother.
He was like your little brother, and your little brother, who was like Mr. like Santito.
He was a good kid.
He was
He
a good kid, He was a good kid, He was already hanging out at UCLA, which of course we shall forgive that.
And I would drive him.
And you would drive him, right? Because Mr. Santito didn't have a car. All right, so so now that's really a life's arc if I ever have seen one. And so mis respetos. But let me tell you, from the moment that I met you, and I won't go to the first time that I really, really met you, but that was in Washington, D.C. You were there for some type of educational conference, and you were staying at the home of Rafael Magallanes, who was in the 70s and 80s the director of the Chicano Center here at USC. So anyway, you always were talking about transportation, and you were always talking. I remember years ago, you were talking about a subway to the sea. Man, I thought you were crazy. I thought you were crazy when I heard this thing about the subway to the sea. And yet, when you became mayor, somehow this whole issue of financing these transportation projects became front and center. I mean, how did you do that? How did you get a dream turned into a reality in terms of financing it? And by the way, for the students, that subway to the sea runs right in front of us, right here along Expo Boulevard, and it goes all the way to Santa Monica. So we owe that to this man, and you never get that credit. Never get that credit. But what did you do as a mayor? What did you do to get Washington to give you that money and to give it pretty quickly?
Well, first of all, I want to thank USC for hosting us. Jack, thank you for giving us this venue. I want to thank George Pla and David Ayon for caring enough to tell the story of the leaders in this community. And I've always said, and I'll say it again, there were many others. They had to limit it, the number. And I'm glad that David mentioned you, because you surely should have been in that book as well.
Don't worry, I'm going to write my own book.
Good.
Hey.
I'm here on the shoulders of others, and I've said that many, many times. To Richard Alatorre, who used my name in vain, and to say that I didn't know that he could count. Actually, so you all know, I knew very well that he could count, because for a year on the RTD board, he beat me on every issue. He, by usually more than one vote, by the way. And I figured if you can't beat him, join him. And once we worked together, we did a lot of the things that we did around transportation together. And so I know how well he counts. But let me mention one other, you mentioned Herman Katz, and I've always given him the credit for, seeing something in me that I maybe didn't see him. Well, I didn't see him myself, but I always got to put my mom in there. And I see a mom right here. I was smiling because I've known the work that she's done with her kids over the years. And, my mom was my inspiration, and my mom was my everything. And, for us, single mom, woman who lived in a home, with a guy with domestic violence and alcoholism, and she was our inspiration for all of us. And I saw your son, and I know how proud he is of you. So I thought, for the moms here, we should all know that was always the person that, the wind beneath, above, on the side of my wings. The transportation, Richard has heard it 100 times. When I got on the RTD board, I said, my mom rode a bus her whole life. And I made the bus network my priority at the time. Everybody was talking about rail, and that was great. But I said, I want to see first-class buses, because the buses back then were full of graffiti. They were second-class buses. They were all smog-filled diesel buses. Working with Richard, I sponsored the first thing to kind of do the methanol buses. We made a mistake there, but we were right about clean fuel. It just was the wrong technology. We went to clean buses. And, you know, I led the graffiti program because I said, you know, my mom got on this, and if people see graffiti all over this bus, they're going to say if they could do it to the bus, what could they do to me? But we didn't do it in a repressive way. I did an art program with these kids. I went, you know, 2 and 3 o'clock in the morning on the LA River and met with, you know, the graffiti artists and, you know, respected them and said, hey, man, I want to work with you. I'm going to do an art program. We're going to do a jobs program. And if you keep on doing these buses, if that doesn't work, we're going to lock you up. But we're not going to lock you up the traditional way. We're going to make you clean the buses. That's what we're going to make you do. And it worked. And if you go on a bus today, you see the etching, but you don't see the graffiti on the buses that you did way back when. So it was my mom, again. You know, she rode a bus most of her life. And I did too until Gilbert and I got a car. I always said it was our car because Gilbert was always riding shotgun, you know. And, you know, that was the genesis behind it. I worked on the RTD board for 2 years and the MTA board before I got elected. Worked with Richard, you know, that East Side Goal Line, you know, Richard and Gloria, you know, and me, you know, all of us. The Pasadena Goal Line, I was chairman of transportation and then speaker when we took it away from them because we didn't feel like they were focused on it enough, and we did an authority. I was part of that as well. And then I became mayor and said, you know, I used to ride my bike to the ocean, and, you know, we ought to have a subway to the sea. Now, we still don't have it, but we did 3 light rail lines, 1 busway. And importantly, and that's the key. And, you know, you were one of those people, and I think Richard said this. I mean, she was so strong on public policy. I mean, like, she was her own staffer. Though you had a great chief of staff.
Yeah.
You had a great, but you were you knew that.
I read the bills.
Yeah, but more than that. No, you knew it to a level of detail that others didn't. I was lucky. I hired the best and the brightest. And, you know, when people talk about my mayoralty or my speakership, they usually talk about the staff that I had. I had really top-notch staff. So what I told them, I said, hey, you know, I just got elected. I've been talking about this. We got to put a plan because there's no money. There's no money. So we did some research, put Measure R on the ballot, half-penny sales tax generating $40 billion over a 30-year period of time. And once we got it passed, and you need, in California, 66.6%. It's like almost impossible, you know, with so many conservative people and people who don't use the bus or train, and so they're not for it. So almost from the beginning, the paper of record, and everybody was making fun of me and saying, but where's your train, man? He says, where's your subway? And I said, well, Tom Bradley ran on the subway in 1973. He got it in 1993. I mean, like, I'm not, you know, this isn't going to happen overnight, but it was 2 years in, right? So in 2008, we put it on the ballot. When Obama was on the ballot, we knew there was going to be a big turnout. We got it just barely. And then, as I said, then they started asking, well, where's your subway? And so we just passed, this was a half-penny sales tax, generating $40 billion over 30 years, not a 10 cents sales tax generating over 3, but they gave me the idea. So I put some really smart people on it, and we came up with America Fast Forward. It was an innovative program that said, let's use tools of a loan program, a grant program, where we repay the government, because if you remember, they hadn't passed the gas tax in like 8 years. They were deficits and debt, and they weren't going to give us any money. Then I convinced all the mayors across the country, because they wanted a grant. They didn't want a loan program or a bond program. And then I convinced President Obama, and first the Republicans, and because they were in power, and then the Democrats, and we were able to get America Fast Forward. And so in the beginning, around the country, we did circles to show the country. We were getting this much of federal money, and in the end, we were getting this much. The vast majority of the money was coming to us because we were putting up our own money. That's kind of how it happened. But a lot of people were part of it. The unions were certainly a big part of it. Obviously, the business community, labor particularly, a big part of it, and it's kind of how we did.
Well, let me pivot now to a union that you grew up with, basically, and that's the teachers' unions. Education, obviously, as you stated very eloquently, your mother was your first teacher. And I remember that your stories, when we were in the assembly, you would say that your mother would read you these amazing stories and Greek,
Iliad and Odyssey.
the Iliad and the
You
Odyssey.
had to read the Iliad and the Odyssey.
Right. In City Terrace, mind
I
you.
can barely read it now.
Right. The Iliad and the Odyssey in City Terrace. I never had the pleasure of meeting your mother, but I mean, she sounds like an amazing woman. But anyway, education obviously brought you to where you're at. And I remember that when you were in the city, when you were a mayor, you were obviously very concerned about the quality of education at LAUSD. So much so that I frankly think you've been the only mayor that has injected himself in a very prominent manner in the education debate. And you introduced a bill, and you and I had a little bit of problems with the bill, but we figured out we worked out some amendments, and it worked out, even though, ultimately the bill was considered and held unconstitutional by the courts. But however, it did show your interest and the fact that you were willing to spend political capital on education. But, it was a rough going for you. Considering the fact that you come from the union movement, and yet at times these friends of yours were not your allies in that discussion. So how did you work through it?
Well, first of all, there was all this ado about the fact that I was the first, and I saw that everybody serving me looked just like me in this town. And so I knew I had to get involved in education, because the only reason why I had broken a glass ceiling was because I went to Cathedral High School, where I got kicked out, and then went to Roosevelt, where I dropped out. But I went back. And when I became mayor, just so you understand, 1 out of 3 schools were failing in the second largest school district in the country. 1 out of 3. We had a 44% graduation rate. My alma mater, Roosevelt High School, when we graduated in 1971, Gilbert in 1972, had a 25% graduation rate. By the time I became mayor 31 years later, they had a 31% graduation rate. Today, Roosevelt High School has an 84% graduation rate.
Yeah.
Garfield High School has about a 90%, a little more than 90% graduation rate. The 1 out of 3 failing schools is 1 out of 10. The 44% graduation rate when I left was 72. It's now 79. But it's not good enough. 1 out of 3 Latinos have a 4-year degree. I'm sorry, 13% of Latinos have a 4-year degree. So LAA, you're very lucky to be here. But you know what? There got to be more of you. And the reason why I fought so hard, because, and I'm going to say it in Spanish, because we should say a little Spanish. El papel de primero no es golpear tu pecho y decir, soy tan único, soy especial. El papel de primero es entender que viniste sobre los hombros de otros y tienes la responsabilidad de abrir la puerta para los demás. The role of the first is not to bang on your chest and say how great you are. The role of the first is to open up the door for the rest, because you know that you got here because there were Richard Alatorre and Polanco and Esteban Torres and Dolores Huerta and Ed Roybal and everybody else. I didn't get here because because I was smarter than anybody else, or certainly had a more storied early life. Well, maybe storied, but the wrong story, right? So I felt this obligation. Now looking back, I probably made some mistakes. The press from the beginning, they wanted to see well, where's the graduation rate after we took over the schools, right? Well, it took 50 years to get here. We're not going to. So, there was this pressure to show results. And so I started pushing my friends and ultimately, pushed them harder than they liked. And then, we did battle. But I tell people, I'm very pro-union. As most of you know, I work for the teachers union. I believe in unions. But I also said, I believe everybody ought to have one. So I helped organize the parent union because they said, parents need to have a voice. And, we did the parent trigger because, some schools were failing, not for 10 years, not for 20 years, but for 50 years. And we're supposed to be okay with that, with the changing leadership in this town. And so, and then, that was after they had already gotten rid of affirmative action. And, all of us were for affirmative action. I got into UCLA on an affirmative action program. And I tell people, some people say I came in through the back door, but one thing's for sure, I got out the front. And, I'm the mayor and the speaker, and nobody else has been both. So, I didn't want that fight, but I had it. And I'm going to tell you something, everybody. Every one of us should keep up that fight, particularly when you've been reading in the newspaper how it's not good enough for some people, to have their kids in the best schools in the country, to have tutors since they were little kids, to be able to train them to do the SAT, and which you and I, after affirmative action, remember, we expanded SAT preparation and AP courses for these kids. Not enough for their kids to have all of that, but they get to buy their way into places as well. And it's outrageous. And we got to stand up for a great America that says public schools is the path to a great education, but everybody ought to have a great public school.
Thank you so much, Mr. Mayor. Now, I'm going to go now to Senator Councilmember Cedillo, and I'm going to bring you back to September of 1994. You received a phone call from me, and I was in the assembly floor, and the driver's license bill, which was a bill to take away driver's licenses from immigrants, had just passed. And I remember calling you in September of 1994 and begging you to run for office against that Latino incumbent who passed that bill.
93.
Was it 93?
93.
Okay. So, do you regret saying no to me at the time?
I don't know what would have happened, but I do know this. First of all, let me thank USC, George Pla and David Ayon. Dean Knott, thank you. This is quite a forum for us to be here and to tell our story and to tell our narrative. As Antonio said, we're here on the shoulders of many people. I also want to acknowledge Bert Corona and Chole Alatorre and their work with immigrants. They played a major role in my political development. And obviously, my parents, my wife, all deceased, and my son who cannot join us today, but who is my guiding light, him and my granddaughters. So let me thank you. I think one good point about that story, which is true, and I don't know what would have happened. I had a great job. I was head of the largest public sector union. I had an opportunity to fund Antonio's first campaign, so that would have impacted it had I not been there. And led that union. We helped save the public healthcare system, working with the leadership of USC. So there were a lot of things that we did that may not have happened had I gone straight to the legislature. But I think one of the other things that's important, and I credit Richard, a lot of this has to do about how we visualize ourselves. My colleague in the council always says, if you can't see it, you can't be it. And so it's so important for us to be here and to tell this narrative because we have to see ourselves. And so it was difficult at that time. I mean, I was very flattered to receive a call from you, but it was overwhelming in some respects. I was committed to being a union leader and that was my ultimate goal. And had I not had major disagreements with my board, I probably would have stayed in the labor movement, but that was not the case to be in. So I went into elected office, and so I guess I don't regret it, but it would sure have been a different presentation had I taken that offer, and I was flattered to have received it.
Well, I mean, talent is talent, and one thing that I loved about Richard Polanco is that he always allowed me the flexibility to recruit, candidates, and so because you were very close to my cousins, the lefties, because I'm the conservative in the family, so the lefties, my cousins loved him, but I think now he loves me.
I do love you.
Okay, so anyway, so you entered in 1994, and was it 94 or 96?
90.
No, 96.
98.
98.
Yes.
Because in 94, the state assembly lost the House. So we were in the minority party. That's when you entered. When we were part of the minority party, and it was not nice to be part of the minority party. So we got to work right away, so that in 96 we took over as Democrats. We launched the first Latino to run for speaker, Cruz Bustamante, and Polanco did that by recruiting all kinds of candidates up and down the state. And then the last day, the last weekend of Get Out the Vote weekend, I'm stuck managing the campaigns, and I'm calling him. I said, things are exploding. Then all of a sudden he says, I can't hear you. I can't hear you. I can't hear you. He was out there having fun in Napa Valley while I was running the campaigns. True story. That's what I'm saying, gotta be true. So anyway, 96, we take over. We literally take over the assembly, and by we, I mean Latinos. We took over the assembly. We took over the Assembly Democratic Caucus. No questions asked. We put up the votes for Cruz Bustamante to be the first Latino speaker. Then Cedillo comes on board in 98, but you came in with guns blazing on the driver's license bill. I called you in 1994 when that darn bill had been passed, and you came in 98 with this single focus on overturning that ill-fated decision from September of 1993. And you stuck with the bill for heaven knows how many years. And I got to tell you a secret, which I've never have told you. But one day I was asked to join Senator John Burton, the President of the Senate, and Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger, who apparently were tired of over negotiating with you on the bill.
Yes.
And they wanted for me to introduce my own bill that would be according to their wishes. And literally I was faced with a decision of to me it's like, I got to be loyal to my friend because he's the one that's been working on this for years. How could I jump over that subject matter when it belongs to him? And so I told the governor and Burton, I said, no, thank you. You have to cut your deal with Cedillo because I'm not going to play your game. And but that's how nasty it gets at times in Sacramento. And that's why I said that loyalty is critical. You never get ahead by screwing somebody else. You never get ahead by taking away someone's jurisdiction. So Gilbert's still stuck with it. And Gilbert, I need to ask you, because I also had a bill that took 7 years to pass. I need to ask you, was this, obviously was the labor of love, but after a point, don't you think it was going to become a point of diminishing returns? And I'm asking that in light of the fact that after 9/11 happened, the security of this country became very difficult, and it became very difficult to even try to pass those kind of bills on behalf of immigrants. So how did you navigate a toughened security atmosphere with your desire to pass this driver's license bill for immigrants?
So let me say a couple things to that. First of all, we can't state enough the work of Richard Polanco to build a caucus. Remember, this is 1994. Art Torres loses, Kathleen Brown loses. It's Proposition 187 era. And similar to today, Mexicans are being attacked. And so it's a very draconian, harsh, difficult time period. Brutal, difficult to go out in public spaces and just really harsh. And Richard Polanco is winning elections and building the caucus very strategically, very smart. He's getting women who are attorneys or have their own businesses, Liz Figueroa, Denise Ducheney, Martha Escutia, getting stalwarts like Nel Soto, building the caucus in places that aren't even thought of as Latino districts. That was genius. And so that was one thing. We were ascending in that. But it was still naive on my part to think that a mere 3 years, 4 years after Prop 187, that somehow people would see the value of having safe highways and hold down their biases. It's what we face today with Trump voters. 38% of the electorate is going to vote for Trump regardless. And so unless we organize, unless we mobilize, unless we do the things that have to be done, register voters, become citizens, amplify our vote, Trump will win again. And so those are the choices that we have. At that time, I introduced the legislation because I had made a commitment. And like you said, it's about keeping your word. It's being committed to the values that we profess publicly. And so I made a commitment. I worked with Nativo Lopez and Bert Corona, and I said, I'm going to introduce the bill. And so I did. It didn't pass. First committee, it died. Second committee, next year, we rewrote the bill.
It went in a coma.
I don't think it got out of the House. The next year, I got to the Senate, and there's momentum, and there's everybody there in the hearing, and it dies with Democratic votes. It dies in the committee. And I'm sitting there with Senator Polanco. Everybody's crying, and I'm thinking, oh my God, right? So there's this burden that you feel, because we feel like we're carrying the burden of our community and these people who have come up looking like our parents, Antonio, right? People are being forced to ride a bus, can't spend time with their families in the morning, one of the most draconian circumstances. And I look to Senator, and we lose, and he says, I said, so what do I do? And he said, well, the great thing about here, every day's a new day. That's what he told me. And they're going to want your votes in the future. As we all know, my wife passed away about a year or so later. It was brutal. I made a commitment to her, or actually she forced me, she grabbed me by the collar and forced me to make this commitment, both to immigrants, to the Dreamers, and to immigrant motorists and to their families. We were very sensitive to what it is to feel like an outsider. Both of us grew up in Borough Heights, she in East LA. We lived across the street. She lived in the Strata Courts housing projects when I was a toddler, and I lived right across the street in the middle of the block in a duplex about a little bigger than this platform. And she said, look, don't forget how we grew up and how our parents, when they had to confront forces of power. And don't forget that and what it felt like. And remember that for these kids, for the Dreamers, for the parents, for the ones who were being confronted and having their cars towed and taken away from them, who would go to school and be admitted to college, be the first in the library, the last to leave, and couldn't apply for a scholarship. And so once, if you knew my wife Ruby, who was beautiful, and I made a commitment to her, while you weren't going to break that commitment. I remember Antonio and I had this conversation at City Hall one day, and I told him about it. And I know people approached you, and I told Antonio, I said, look, man, I think you wanted me to come to City Hall. I think you wanted me to run for council or something. I said, no, I have to finish this work. And then I know we were at your house. And I said, I have to finish this work. And you said, no. And I said, no, look, I committed to Ruby. The next time I see her, I got to make sure I did what I said. And I can't say Antonio convinced me to go do something else. I told him that at the house. And so, you make these commitments, Martha, and you're right. They're personal commitments, but they're also ethical commitments. They're moral commitments. And I say that to all of you who are here because you're constantly going to be challenged in your life. Do you do things just for money or for a promotion? And forget why you're here. Here, everybody's like, oh, yeah, Viva la Raza, yeah, Chicanos, yeah, we're going to help the community. But those decisions, the critical decisions, are made later in life when you have to make those decisions, who you hire, who you fire, right? Who you work for, who you don't work for. What's the core value? Are you consistent with those core values? And so that's the struggle. That's the challenge of leadership. Challenge of leadership is doing what's right when it's not popular and doing what's right when nobody's looking. Those are the challenges, right? Antonio's been a champion in education, yes, in transportation, but that's pretty popular. Not that so much. But in education, taking on your own allies because you believe this is the right thing to do, that's being a leader, right?
let me just say something about
Yes, Mr. Alatorre.
what Gil just talked about. One of the things I learned early in life was, and I was taught by, good teachers. The political process, as I learned it, is 95% bullshit, okay?
My man.
And
I love him.
I was wondering when that Richard was going to come out. He came out.
5% of it
Colorful language.
defines what life is about to you and what's important. And so long as you remember that, and you can give everything away, but you can't give away what you're all about. I was part of his group. I mean, I went up, flew up, because he calls me and tells me the bill is up. He says, I want you in Sacramento. And I went there. And then, one of my best friends, I walked in with him. His name was John Burton,
President of the Senate.
President of the Senate, and, just a guy that,
A Trojan grandpa, by the way.
huh?
A Trojan grandpa. His grandson's
Trojan, that's
coming.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He
And, he says, what are you doing here? And I said, well, I'm with him. And he says, you're with him? It's a shitty bill. And I says, all right, who gives a damn? Then if you don't like it, then why don't you just help them make it good? Oh, no, you're full of crap and everything else. So then I go back and I tell Gil, I says, are you sure that you have the votes for this bill? Well, So then he comes back and tells me, looks at me again, come on. So I went off to another thing he had to take care of. And he says, you gotta get him to drop it. I'm not gonna get him to drop nothing. I says, this guy's given his life, made commitments and everything else, and to me, it's good. And I said, man, when I started in this business, you were one that talked to me about what's important in life. And now you're telling me that what he wants is bad? Shit, man, he says, I had a lot of people in my district that didn't have driver's license. And why? I said, this is just an opportunity to help them, parents of children, and to help out students that are in school. I said, it makes no sense. Ah, shit, that's the problem with the Alatorre. Why don't you just go back home? And, God bless him. God bless him for his tenacity. God bless him for his stubbornness. It became a reality. And let me tell you something, there is nothing more important than fighting for something that is going to benefit people that have no power, don't have any votes, or anything else. It's just like today in the state of California, we celebrate the life of Cesar Chavez. And I had the great fortune of working with him and passing an Agricultural Labor Relations Act in the state of California. No place else in the country has what we have in California. And it was because of him and the things that he believed in and the things that I happen to believe in, because my father, worked, my mother worked, and there is very few Latino parents that didn't come at one time or another from the agricultural fields of this country.
So that, ladies and gentlemen, is power shift. I am going to now open it. I will now open it for questions and answers. So how do you want questions? How do you want? I see a hand up here, and there's a microphone coming for you. And if you can just please state your name and as well as identify the person who you want the question addressed to.
Yeah, I'm Dr. Gus Frias. I'm a graduate of the Price School, and I'm one of the few Latinos here at USC who has a bachelor's, master's, and doctorate. And I want to thank every single one of the presenters because they are the inspiration behind the struggles that my friends and I all engage here at USC. Thank you very much, all of you.
Thank you, Gus.
Oh, Gus.
My question, I guess, focuses on learning from you how you not only can teach our audience about your strengths, but also about your weaknesses. So please share with us a personal weakness and how you transformed it into a strength.
Okay, let's make that into a round-robin question. We'll start first with Mr. Villaraigosa. Talk about a weakness and how you made that into a strength, and then we'll just go down the row.
Well, I have many weaknesses, so it's hard for me to think of all of them. I think the biggest weakness, I said this in the campaign when they asked all of us to talk about our sacrifices, and everybody talked about their sacrifices, and I said, I didn't sacrifice. I did what I love to do, what I've been doing since I was a kid. The people that sacrificed were my kids and my family. And, I'm closer to my family today than I ever have been, and in no small part because I think over time I realized I was trying to change the world and doing everything I could to be a part of the change that I had grown up wanting to be. And, I needed to start at home. And I think I'm very proud of the fact that I'm closer today with my kids than I ever have been.
Good for you, Antonio. Senator Polanco.
I think the weakness is was the inability for a long period of time to say no to event scheduling. In so doing, family, along the lines that Antonio references, made comments to. That's where I think for a long period of time my weakness was too much devotion and commitment in creating that of what was created, and the weakness was not paying attention to the family issues, the first of my son, the first of my daughters, all the firsts that occur that you miss. And they're gone. And there's tremendous sacrifice that goes unnoticed. It is a 24/7, 7-day-a-week public service that you're on. And so to your question, Dr. Gus Frias, whom I grew up with, the same neighborhood, different career paths, and thank you for all that you do. I would say the weakness was too often the inability to say no, and in so doing, the family sacrifices. And you can't get those back.
Councilmember Cedillo.
I think all of us on this panel have sacrificed too much for our families, and we've learned that, and I think we're better parents and family members as a result of that. I have a couple of flaws. I have a tremendous sense of urgency, and so that's a challenge because not everybody is ready to run the race as fast as you want them to. Not everybody's ready to sign up and join and come forward, and so it requires a commensurate patience with people because we're passionate people, all of us who are on this stage right now, and I just have a great sense of urgency. I'm annoyed by injustice. I find it outrageous, and so I struggle with that. As I get older now, I struggle with candor, and so I have probably too candid for a person in politics. And
I have the same problem too.
Yeah. After my wife passed, it was really difficult for me not to be candid and not to take action. So those are the challenges that every day I battle. On the city council, we're doing great work. Sanctuary City with our own new Justice Department, with our own new judges and funding. We're making great progress. It's not visible, but we are making great progress in terms of housing and homelessness. We're opening up a women's shelter shortly that I'm very proud of. I've got a great team. But every day I get up and I have a great passion and sense of urgency when I see the challenges that confront us. And finally, obviously, all of us have struggled under the worst president in the history of this nation. And so we must do all that we can to come together as a city, as a state, but as a nation to reclaim our place as a great democracy and as a great nation. The only nation in the world, as you get to travel more, that's made up of immigrants. And it's why so much of my work is focused around the value and valor of immigrants here. So,
Thank you, Councilmember.
Yeah.
Councilmember Alatorre.
You know, it's interesting. It's interesting about this question. And I think that all of us have had our share of problems with family. You know, I went through 2 divorces before I was fortunate enough to meet my wife. And nobody ever thought that I would be around 25 years plus married, and also a daughter that taught me about what it's all about having a daughter in your life or having a son in your life. And I'm fortunate enough that I took the time to learn that. She taught me a lot. Little kid, you know, but she still is my daughter, and she's very important to me. And I think it's my family, and I'm lucky. I spent almost 30 years in elected office, and I've learned how to spend time and enjoy life with my family, and that's important. And you have to give up a lot when you're in public life, especially if you care as passionately as I know these guys here, and the passion that the moderator has in anything that she does. So took us a while to learn, but we learned. And, you know, I thank my wife and my sons. Teaches you humility, and of course, a little girl will always teach you humility in life.
And on that one, we're going to close. I have a hard stop at 8 o'clock, and the time has come. Thank you all. I think we have Mr. George Pla, who's going to make some closing remarks, and then we shall call it a night. But as George is coming up here, I just want to thank all of you for being a wonderful audience, and thank our panelists here. Thank you for your. I just want to thank you guys for your honesty. Just thank you for your honesty. Mr. Pla, you have the floor.
Martha, thank you. Great job. What do you think? Town and Gown is very special to me. I'm very fortunate a while ago that I, with others, was one of the founders of the Latino Alumni Association. Yes. Our very first dinner was at Town and Gown. We charged $50 a ticket, and we weren't sure who the heck was going to show up. So I want to tell you that if you fast forward to today, we have raised to date $19 million. And better, we have awarded exactly 8,600 scholarships since then. Now, more than money, our Latino Alumni Association provides support for the students and their families. And I want to ask Mercy Wheeler to please stand, our fearless leader. Mercy? Where are you? To my friend Jack Knott, a progressive leader, and it shows. It was mentioned that U.S. News and World Report ranked our public policy school price number 3. What was not said is that it's a tie with Harvard, and I know Jack is going to be number 1 very soon. Jack, thank you. I want to show you all something on the screen. Can we have that, please? Yes? Soon?
Oh my God.
To you, principals, could you please look at the screen? Take a look. Richard, Gil, take a look at the screen. I want you to see something.
Oh my God.
Can everyone see it? Well, how do you like the hair? This is Martha, as a student, receiving an award from me when I was president of the Alumni Association. Back then, she was a top student. And for you students, I want to tell you a story. There was this little girl from East LA who was raised by her grandparents. Took the bus to school, not a tale of woe, it's what it is, and gets straight A's. The only A I ever got was in PE. Goes to USC, gets a Latino alumni scholarship, enrolls at Price. What do you think of that? Graduates magna cum laude and goes to Georgetown Law School. First woman, first Latina to chair the Judiciary Committee in both the State Assembly and the State Senate. But my favorite is that she authored legislation to require AP classes for every school district in California. That was not the case. That's what Martha did. Now about the book. David and I, about 9 years ago, started talking about this book. And we realized that where we were headed in this country is, and the numbers are astounding to me, 60 million Latinos in the United States and 15 million Latinos in California. And yet, in 2019, we're still invisible, we're still marginalized, and still stereotyped. And you young people don't even know who these warriors are. And I'm going to tell you a little more than what you've heard tonight, including those that could not be here tonight. You students should know that Congressman Roybal forced the Census Bureau to create the category called Hispanic that did not exist. That led to representation and programs for the Latino community. Esteban Torres, the North American Free Trade Agreement would have never been approved were it not for Esteban Torres. And this kid from East LA, working at a power plant, an auto plant in Pico Rivera, who tattoos and all, rises to become a United States ambassador, Esteban Torres. Art Torres, Senator Torres, was the chairman of the Health Committee in the Assembly. With his friend Ted Kennedy, he actually came up with the idea with Ted Kennedy as to what you know as the Affordable Care Act today, back in the 80s. Maria Elena Durazo, Miguel Contreras changed the face of labor, fighting for the minimum wage. And Antonio would tell you that he would never have been elected mayor were it not for Maria Elena and Miguel Contreras. Gloria Molina, the first in the State Assembly, the first in the State Senate, the first in City Council, the first as a county supervisor. but more importantly, is she personally stood against the governor and the legislature to stop them from building a prison in East Los Angeles. That's what Gloria Molina did. Now to the principals that are here today, and I would like to ask them to stand if you would as I call your name. Richard Alatorre, please stand. Let me tell you about redistricting that was not covered tonight just yet. Richard, with all his antics and all the humor that he has, had the foresight to bring redistricting to Caltech, computerize the entire state, and forecasted forward housing patterns, transportation patterns, and forecasted the lines that he drew looking forward 25 years. You would not have ever known anybody named Padilla or Lara or Becerra or all of the members that Senator Polanco elected throughout the state of California were it not for how Richard did redistricting. And he mentioned the Agriculture Labor Relations Board. What he did not say is what it gave finally the collective bargaining rights to farm workers. Jerry Brown did sign legislation, but it would never happen without Richard Alatorre. But my favorite about Richard is he discovered that in the state prisons, not in the 30s or the 40s or the 60s, but in the 70s, they were sterilizing the men of color without their knowledge. Richard discovered that and put a stop to it. Richard Alatorre. Senator Polanco, please stand. Senator, a lot has been said about what he did with the Latino caucus, what he did for women getting elected. What did not get covered enough is how he went about looking for candidates, it's true, but proving that he could elect Latino candidates in non-Latino districts. And that had never, ever been done or thought of before. And he was the first elected official in America, bar none, that had the first hearing on AIDS and got death threats over it. Senator Richard Polanco. Gilbert Cedillo, a lot has been covered about the driver licensing bill. And what was not said, and I want to add to it, is that he was called and made fun of. He was called One Bill Gil and was mocked about it. Guess what he is today? He's One Mil Gil, because 1 million people now have signed up and got driver's licenses, providing the dignity for parents to drive their kids to school and to drive themselves to work. Gilbert Cedillo. Antonio has been covered. Thank you. Just want to say that this is human impact. This is human impact on health policy. It's human impact on public safety. It's human impact on education reform, human impact on voting rights, human impact on immigration. And what's interesting to me is that the Latino Alumni Association provides financial support and counseling to the students, and the Price School trains our students about critical policy issues that affect our entire society, and I'm one of them, Jack. Thank you very much. Power shift, I want to underscore to all of you, is not about one group over another. Power shift is about diversity and inclusion for everybody, and I want to underscore that as well. The intent of this book is to bring a segment of our community to the center, just like historically the Jewish community, the Italian community, the Irish community, and many more. And finally, I want to leave you with a quote from my friend Leon Panetta, who provided the foreword to our book. And I quote, "This book shows that the American dream is not a gift, it's a struggle. Power Shift presents the journey of 10 warriors who gave people the chance to live the American dream." Thank you very much.